Good evening, our friends, once again in the PD, South Carolina, and around the country and the world. And welcome once again to the Leo and Larry Show. I'm Leo Woodbury, and once again, my co-host Larry Smith is not able to be with us, so he'll be back again. And as always, we have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful guest who is very knowledgeable and will definitely help you to learn some new things and empower you. And I'm talking about none other than Dr. Florence Anorou, who is a plant and environmental specialist as well as a botanist at South Carolina State University, one of our historical Black colleges and universities. So great to have you with us, Dr. Anorou, and just want to welcome you to the show and, tell people a little about yourself, how you got started with your love of plants and botany, and what kind of work are you doing?
Good afternoon, Reverend Woodbury, and thank you for inviting me, and I'm glad to be here. As you mentioned, I am a plant and environmental scientist and also a faculty at the Department of Biology at South Carolina State University and an associate scientist for 1890 Research and Extension, which is an arm of the university. My love for plant actually dates back as far as I can remember. My dad is a botanist or agriculturist, also in education. And as the first child of the family, I was his first child. And as a girl, he actually took me under his wing and taught me everything that I remember knowing and my love for plants. I followed him around as he manicured our surroundings back in Nigeria. As you can tell from my accent, I'm originally from Nigeria, nationalized here in the United States. But from those early days, I just love plants, everything about it. And I loved nature because of my exposure and experience with my dad. And I always said when I grow up, I wanted to be like my dad and I wanted to know more about plants and nature. And I continued with that love. Everything that I did, even in my high school days, I always surrounded myself with knowing about plants. I loved learning the scientific names of plants as little as I was. And as a college student, I didn't think twice about what to major in. I knew that I wanted to study plants, so I looked for colleges that had botany or environmental science as a major when I moved to the United States with my husband, and majored in botany and environmental science. Luckily, one of few schools that I attended had a double major. And my career has always been centered around that area of study.
Okay,
And
great.
yes.
Yeah, and you also do, so you also work some other places in addition to South Carolina State University, right?
Yes. I have, as part of my research and my outreach, I have worked with the Agricultural Research Service, which is an arm of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I've also worked with the Department of Energy on environmental issues, especially looking at ways to clean up the environment with plants, phytoremediation, and also looking at brownfields. But I've also done a lot of work on food insecurity, climate justice, and health disparities, which is linked to, of course, lack of access to fresh food and exposure to environmental pollution. So I have always linked my work to connect the plant science and environmental science. But along the way, I've always wanted to bring the next generation of botanists and environmentalists along with me. So through my teaching career, I have mentored a lot of students, bringing them into the research as well as all of the outreach and community efforts. But my greatest joy, in addition to my research and teaching, is it's partnering with community organizations, green organizations, faith-based organizations, such as, of course, Reverend Woodbury, when we met some years ago. And through this partnership, I have extended my work to affect not just my surrounding community at the academic level, but to use my research and my knowledge to impact other communities. Recently, I was also appointed as one of the science advisory board members for EPA, which is one of, again, the humbling appointments that I've had, knowing that my voice and what I can lend to the body of science that is out there can affect our environmental policies, water, air, as well as food. So that's been really a great joy and humbling experience for me.
Yes, and I know you keep saying communities, but you also do some stuff on the global level with the United Nations. And I understand you just got back from Africa and Tanzania and Ghana. And what did you do? What did you do in those two countries?
Yes, so I have through my outreach work, I have worked with organizations not just in the United States, but around the globe, but particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, in Ghana. I have some colleagues in Tanzania, but in Nigeria, which is my birth country, I have worked on sustainable or regenerative agriculture, helping our people to know the impact of the, farming the right way, and also how to practice agriculture so that they get maximum results to help mitigate food insecurity, but also educating them on environmental issues such as deforestation, erosion, and other conservation issues. As you know, Africa as a continent bears the brunt of environmental exposure, and of course, consequently, the health issues, while they actually generate very little of the polluting factors that lead to climate change. But unfortunately, the people there are not in a position to do much about the problems that they're exposed to. The resources are not there. The government are not really structured to help people like you have in the Western nations. And so part of my work with local and academic institutions is to educate. And Reverend Woodbury, I always borrow your saying. You always say that the Calvary is not coming. We are the Calvary. So I always tell the people, sometimes it's we who have to save ourselves. So we have to look back and see how can we, the people, make the best of what we have. But we need to be educated because knowledge, it's powerful. And so that's part of the work that I do. And also letting people know how they can link themselves or link their organizations or their institutions to the United Nations through resources and other ways to benefit from that organization. Because a lot of these countries don't know what the United Nations is all about. They don't know about the sustainable goals that United Nations have for each nation. So that's some of the things that I help to educate. Again, mentoring the young as well as the the professionals in academic institutions and other governmental agencies.
Mhm. Absolutely. And see, the thing about plants is that I don't think a lot of people realize, as older people did, that plants are food, plants are medicine. Our clothing can come from plants. So many different things. But you mentioned on more than one occasion, I think 3 times, you talked about food insecurity. And
Right.
we just went through COVID, where we lost a lot of people because of pre-existing conditions that are tied to food. So can you talk a little bit about, and let our listeners know, how important it is that we make sure that we're getting good food and that our food supply is sustainable, that it literally makes the difference between life and death.
Absolutely. There's a saying that goes that the food that you eat can either kill you or it can keep you alive. And
Mhm.
and your access to food, it's as important to your access to medication in some cases. Um, if you're hungry, there's so many cascading factors that happen when you are not eating well. You talked about it, your immune system, for example, during COVID. A lot of people, a lot of diseases that we have today, many of them are preventable.
Mhm.
Preventable because if we're eating the right food, if we have access to the right kind of food, our immune systems are stronger and we are more inclined to be healthier and not succumb to a lot of some of the diseases that we have. But
Mhm.
but unfortunately, most people and statistics and research have shown that in the United States, the people that are more likely to have high rates of any of the diseases, whether it's diabetes, heart disease, obesity-related diseases, are the minority, or now, what they call the BIPOC, the Black,
People of color,
Indigenous,
people.
right, the people of color, exactly.
Mhm.
And because these are the same people that have less access to healthy food, they are the ones that are also disproportionately impacted by all of the health related issues that are linked to lack of access to food. And so when you put food in the center, you can literally drive lines from food to your health, to your immune
Mhm.
system, and to your mental health. All of that is linked to food. And so your access to food, and when I say access to food, I'm talking about healthy food, because you can also have access to food, you're filling your stomach, but you're still getting sick because basically putting poison in your system. If
Mhm.
the only food you have access to is canned food, for example, people go to the pantry, they go to this food share areas. A lot of the times what they're giving are the canned food. Now, if you look at a typical canned food, it's loaded with sodium, it's loaded with fat and other chemicals. So you're literally slowly killing yourself, even though you're
Mhm.
filling your stomach with food. So it still boils down to access to food, but access to the right kind of food. And that's
Right.
why food insecurity it's a big issue. But for me, I look at it as we should move towards a place where there is food sovereignty, where everybody has equal access to healthy food, food that
Mhm.
can nourish your body and also prevent you from getting sick from all the other things that are connected to over-processed
Mhm.
food, which is what
Yeah.
a lot of people of color are exposed to or have access to.
Right. Yeah. It's what they call food deserts. A lot of people don't have fresh produce, and you go into convenience stores, and everything in there is heavily laden with sugar, heavily laden
Absolutely.
with salt. You know, people like to have smoked meats, you know, processed
Absolutely.
meats, have nitrate,
Absolutely.
which can cause cancer, you
Cancer.
know, and
Exactly.
yeah. And
Exactly.
I had a doctor one time who he and I were having a conversation, and the way he put it was this. He said some people literally dig their graves with a spoon. That's what he said, with a
Absolutely.
spoon.
I,
Yeah.
I agree. I agree 1,000%. And if you look at, take any state in the United States of America, and I've left the African continent now. In the United States of America, take any states, and you look at the map, the food desert map, you will see that the food deserts are always located in the places where the people of color are residing.
Mm-hmm.
If you also take the food swamp, and food swamp, it's the opposite of food desert, is where you don't have any access to a grocery store within a certain miles. And typically if you don't have a grocery store within a 5 to 10 mile range, that area is defined as a food desert. But in those same areas, you have what we call food swamps. The food swamps are these stores where you have access to the kind of food that I just mentioned, the canned food, the dollar stores. So if you
Mm-hmm.
take the map of where all the dollar stores are located in the United States, and you superimpose that to where all the food deserts are, you will see that it's in the same location where
Mm-hmm.
the colored people are residing. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you look at it this way, the same group of people or the same communities that don't have access to any grocery store where they can buy fresh produce. At the same time, they have this food swamp popping at every corner. So their only source of food is going to a dollar store to buy canned beans, canned oil, everything canned. And as you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, if you take any of those canned food and read the ingredients there, you will marvel as how is it possible that people are eating this day in and day out, including children. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
biggest problem. So we start slowly to poison our systems. The little kids are being poisoned. Once they get off their mother's breast milk, for those who breastfeed, or their infant milk, the poisoning begins.
Yes,
Those
yes.
kids are
Mhm.
Right. Those
Yes,
kids are fed on canned, they literally fed on canned food. And some of them, the only fresh food they have, depending on their school, some of this, again, the school system is also based on where you live. If you live
mhm,
in these poor neighborhoods, you are more likely to get canned food in your school as well.
right.
So you're poisoned all through your life. And that's the
Mhm.
biggest issue.
And it's so bad now. I was talking with someone on Saturday, and a mature adult, let me put it that way. And we were saying, and I know you've had the same experience, and a lot of people in our audience, we never heard of anything like juvenile diabetes when we were children.
Absolutely.
Children didn't
Absolutely.
get diabetes, you know what I mean? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and not very many adults. But one thing that people have, and what really kind of irks me is the way zoning is, and it's
Yes.
so hard to get fresh produce, to have large gardens. Some cities actually have urban farms, and I'm talking about big
Absolutely.
cities like
Yes.
Chicago. But the
Yes.
zoning prevents people from growing their own food, and you get these little tiny farmers markets. You get these little tiny community gardens that definitely can't feed a whole community, and people call that progress. But if one of the challenges is, and you being the expert can explain, that people can now grow food indoors. They can grow it in small spaces, and it
Absolutely.
doesn't have to be labor intensive. A lot of people don't want to garden, because they think it's such
Absolutely.
hard work. So why don't you explain to some of our folks how they can grow fresh food and not be dependent waiting for some corporation to come? And
Absolutely.
mhm,
Indoor gardening, it's becoming very popular, especially in the cities where there's very little space for people to grow. At an individual level, you can grow your own food indoors with the right lighting. And a lot of these lightings or grow lights you can buy off the internet, and you can grow things like your basic vegetables, because of course you can't grow everything that you need. But if you're growing some of what you need, the essentials, that helps to make your health even better. If you can grow your leafy greens, if you can grow your tomatoes, and all the others, you say your herbs, those things make up a big chunk of what you eat every day. And that will actually reduce the money you spend buying some of the canned food, but also it will add some nutrients, some fresh, healthy food to your diet, so that you're not
mhm,
constantly eating canned food. And then you talked about, indoor growing. A lot of cities now do what is called vertical gardens, where they turn buildings into entire grow environment, and you can
mhm,
grow a huge amount of vegetables indoors vertically. Basically, you grow them, with the right equipment. Now, some of this, I have to say, some of it, some of those equipment are expensive. But if you have the right tools and at the community level, you can actually construct some of those out of buildings, and you can grow again those basic green leafy vegetables and your tomatoes, your herbs,
mhm,
indoors, and you have access to the fresh produce. Also, you can do container gardening, and that's one of the things that I've been doing workshop for a long time. Container gardening is very, very important. If you live in an apartment in the city, you can actually do container gardening to provide you enough veggies for a family of, say, 2 or 3, right in your apartment, or in front of your apartment, or in front of your house. If you live in a city where you don't have land, you can do
mhm,
container gardening and grow almost anything, including potatoes, in containers. You can use
mhm,
buckets and transform them into growth environment, and grow some of the food that you need. But a lot
mhm,
of this needs education and practice, for people to see that sometimes we have to take matters into our own hands, because eventually, I don't foresee a time where the food deserts are going to be gone. There are
mhm,
some efforts in some cities where, like you mentioned, they're bringing these community gardens, but it only serves a few people, so it doesn't serve everybody. There
mhm,
has to be so many community gardens in the city to serve the people that really need it. And
right.
so, not until we get to that point, people can do things, take action at their own individual level to mitigate the effect of food insecurity by growing their own thing. And seeds are very inexpensive, by the way. So a
Mhm,
lot of these vegetables, their seeds are very expensive. You just need to germinate them, grow them in these containers, and you have access to fresh
mhm.
food. Right.
Well, I'm excited now because I never thought about what we have in these communities that are struggling income wise and and you have these old buildings and the cities will take them and they'll knock them down and now you just have an empty lot and
Absolutely.
where the zoning won't even let you grow any food and we could I'm just excited about the prospect of taking some of these old abandoned buildings. You don't have to completely
Absolutely.
renovate them like a home, but actually turn it into a space where you're growing food and I we
Absolutely.
yeah, that's amazing. But plants also can be used for so many other things like clothing, um,
Yes.
For blocks,
Yes.
you can make buildings. So you also are one of the people who license hemp
Yes.
farmers
Yes.
and growing hemp. So can you talk about some of that? Because people think of plants as trees and grasses and food, but there's so many other things you can do with plants. For example, hemp. Mhm.
Absolutely. So, in my introduction, I didn't get to that, I didn't get specific about my research, but my most recent research is on industrial hemp. In the state of South Carolina, industrial hemp was legalized in 2018, and I was one of the scientists that helped Black farmers to help them navigate the process of getting licensed to grow industrial hemp, from the application to the fees and meeting all the restrictions they had then. And continuously, that has been part of my, my goal in making sure that people get to know more about this plant.
What
Industrial
is
hemp,
what is hemp? I mean, is that do
yes.
people get high off hemp? What is
No, no,
hemp?
no. So yeah, so part of what I was getting to was that part of the job that we had then was to educate. Because even though it was licensed in South Carolina, people still confuse industrial hemp with marijuana. So the first thing we did was to initiate a massive educational campaign to educate not just the farmers but the public. Even within the university system, it took a while for them to even buy into the getting involved in industrial hemp research. But as time went on, people realized how wonderful this plant is. And actually, industrial hemp is not a new crop. It's a re-emerging crop, because if you look back in the history of industrial hemp in the 1950s, it was very popular. Um, Henry Ford, I'm sorry, built one of his cars with the fiber from this plant.
Mhm.
But somewhere along the line, industrial hemp and marijuana cross hairs, and people confuse them, and they classify both of them under as a restricted crop. And since then, many states have been fighting to separate the two. And many states, Kentucky, for example, has been working on industrial hemp for even before South Carolina State. And a lot of these states have gone so far to really tap into the benefits of this plant. Industrial
Mhm.
hemp is different from marijuana because it does not make you high. They are both they are from the same parent, if I use that word. So industrial hemp and marijuana are both cannabis. They're in the cannabis family. But what separates them is the compound that makes people high, which is the THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, and that's the THC. The THC is what makes people high in marijuana. Industrial hemp, although it is also a cannabis plant, have very little, when I say little, it's 0.03% THC. That means no matter how much you smoke the industrial hemp, you are not going to get high.
Mhm.
But unlike marijuana, that marijuana does have its medicinal uses when it's used right. And that's why in the medical field now, they're looking at that, for expanding the use of marijuana. But industrial hemp, it's, in my opinion, and if you look at the research and the statistics on this plant, it is a wonder plant. And when I do my workshops and my seminars and webinars, I always remind people there are a few plants that can do what industrial hemp does. Number one, this plant can feed you. Number two, it can heal you. Number three, it can clothe you. Number four, it can house you. Number five, you can drive your car, fly your airplane with products from this plant.
Mhm.
That's the
Bio,
entire
biofuel.
economy.
Mhm.
If you look at that, that's our
Biofuels.
entire economy. Yes.
Mhm. Yes. Well, you said a house, it can house you, so you can make a house out of hemp.
Absolutely. So the industrial hemp has um, two types. There is a CBD type, which is where the CBD oil that is everywhere now comes from. It's extracted from the flower buds of the industrial hemp. And then you have the fiber variety. And the fiber variety can be grown for just the fiber, or it can be grown for the grain, the seeds. So the industrial hemp seed, it's one of the most nutritious seeds. It's loaded with the omega fatty acids. It has omega fatty acid 3, 6, and 9, which most seeds don't have all three combined. These are the hot, healthy oils like you find in walnuts and pecans. This grain, the industrial hemp seed, has all of that. But in addition to that, that seed is also very good for biofuel. That's why I mentioned the fifth thing that I mentioned, that you can drive your car with it. You can fly your airplane from that oil or that same plant. But going back to the fiber, the industrial hemp fiber can be used to build houses. It could be used for insulation. And that's why it is one of the few plants that can house you. And the fiber is very strong. It's antimicrobial, it's mold resistant. So it's a perfect sustainable way to build houses. So again, part of the workshop that we do as director of our industrial hemp research at South Carolina State 1890 is to educate farmers, but also to let them know how important this plant is. And also to help the USDA to start to remove the restrictions they have on farmers growing this plant. And so that alone, it's one of the things that gives me passion to continue to experiment on different varieties. Each year they have different varieties that come up, and part of the research is to look at the varieties that are best suited for our climate here in South Carolina, because some varieties do well in the northern part of the state. They may not do well over here in South Carolina. So we're looking at all of those varieties to determine which ones are the best. But we're also looking at the plants that have the least amount of THC, because that's what you're looking for. Sometimes you might buy a seed from a source to grow, and the THC level might be slightly higher than what it is. And in that case, you would then have to find ways to mitigate to make sure that the THC level stays where it's supposed to be. And that's part of the research that we're doing. But it is a really a wonder plant, as I mentioned, for all the things that I talked about. The fiber, it is so superior for clothing, shoes, handbags, rugs. They all come from this plant. And it's like I mentioned, it's mold resistant. It's very lightweight, and it withstands moisture. So it, just like when you wear your cotton, when you make clothing and shoes with it, it does not have that odor that you have, like if you have sweaty feet and things. So it's really an amazing plant, and we're just starting to scratch the surface on the plant. But the good news is that the United States of America, are realizing, especially in the industrial world, in the commercial world, they're realizing the potential for this plant. And so they're looking forward to using a lot of the fiber from this plant to make cars, airplane, electronics, and so many other things. Bioplastics, as we move towards the green global economy, we're looking for sustainable materials for our plates, straws, and other things that we use. And industrial hemp fiber is one of those biodegradable substitutes for plastic, the synthetic plastic materials that we use to make plastic products. So you'll be hearing more about industrial hemp soon.
And How easy is it fairly easy to grow? Is it a difficult crop? I mean, you
It's
know,
unlike it's well, I wouldn't say it's you have to know the do's and the don'ts of growing the plant. It's not like your tomatoes or your cotton or things like that. It requires very specific conditions to grow, because if you do things wrong, you may not get the results you're looking for. So you have to know your soil, you have to know how much you grow per acre and all those things. So, but once you start growing and learn how to do it, it becomes, becomes second nature.
mm. So
So
do we have companies that are like, because I remember reading that George Washington, the first president of this country, he also grew hemp and they used it for paper and ropes and
yes,
clothing
yes.
back in those days. And are there any companies in South Carolina or nearby that is actually taking hemp in Kentucky or elsewhere and turning it into clothing or plastic or pocketbooks, and are there any, or is this a huge and tremendous opportunity?
There are companies, but in South Carolina, a lot of companies are in the works now, to start doing all of the processing and production of products from industrial hemp. The problem was that, like I mentioned, this was legalized in 2018, and we're now in 2023. So there's about, roughly
Five
4 years,
5 years.
5 years, right? So
Mhm.
the first 3 years was mostly focused on the CBD, in trying to understand all of the nuances of the regulations. Of course, SCDA, South Carolina State Department of Agriculture, is heavily involved in everything production. They monitor, they follow you from the time you get your license to the time you harvest, to where you're taking your products to. They monitor you to make sure that you are growing what you said you're growing.
Mhm.
And so a lot of attention is there now. Recently, more attention is focusing on the fiber, because at the, like I mentioned, there was a craze for the CBD, production. So now that attention is focused towards the fiber, it's going to take a while for the processing and the production of the products that I mentioned to catch up with it. Of course,
Mhm.
South Carolina being always late in the game, as they were, they're still playing catch up. So just recently, last year and this year, a lot of companies are now investing in trying to bring processing facilities in South Carolina and also in North Carolina. I think there's one processing facility in North Carolina, but a few more are coming. And the goal is to have these processing facilities so that farmers, when they grow, would have a place to um,
Take
process
their
their
crop. Mhm.
process their crop. Yes, and the processing facility of equipment are not cheap. And so this now that they know that there's a potential and they've seen where this can take the nation from an economic point of view, they're willing to invest in and go into that as a business. So that's
Mhm.
where we are right now. So over in the next maybe year or two, that more processing plants, and also more companies that will be using the processed materials will be popping up, here and there. As I
Mhm.
mentioned, once you process the fiber, it can go different ways depending on what you want to do with it. If you want to build, that's a separate type of processing. If you're doing clothing, linen, towels, rugs, there's different route. If you're doing handbags, book bags, shoes, that's a different route. So as there's this diversity in all the different products, and people learning more about it, that it's going to be, there'll be more processing facilities. And I think that even the processing equipment will eventually become more affordable for companies and farmers. So right now, what we're working on is to get farmers to find ways to get, put resources together to have a centralized processing facility where they can bring their harvested hemp plant to process within different locations. And so that is the scheme, the goal that we're working on now. And then with that, and also companies bringing in their other facilities, that would open up doors for more farmers to grow more acreage, right?
And that can help to develop a lot of rural communities that are
Absolutely.
struggling. You know, you bring a
Absolutely.
processing plant there, and that means jobs for people, which means rather
Absolutely.
than young people living, they can now build homes and stay in their communities. Yes, and
Absolutely.
and you mentioned that it's mold resistant. So I was thinking about all of the homes and businesses in Marion
Yes.
County, the church that got shut down because they had excessive molds, people's homes, the school in Britain that got shut down because. So how does this help with climate change? How does this help with natural disasters where we're getting floods and a lot of rain and people's homes, getting mold in it, and which is impacting people's health?
So it helps with climate change on multiple levels. The plant itself is one of the huge carbon sequesters. It can literally sequester carbon underground by roots, but because it grows very fast also, it can also help to capture carbon in the air, stored in the leaves. So it's doing this carbon sequestration underground and above ground, but also because you are also using it to make sustainable products. You are also reducing the amount of trees that will be cut down. For example, paper. You can use the fiber from this plant to make paper, to make all these products. So that means that there's less trees, mature trees that they cut for the same products. And so it is mitigating climate change by being a carbon sequester, but also in terms of the mitigation or adaptation. When you use that as a building material or insulation, because of its anti-mold potential, it helps to quickly return flooded homes back to usable places where people can easily move back, because the material actually dries out very quickly. When it soaks water, because it's breathable, it's light, it dries out very quickly. If you use it as an insulation, since it's not going to be molded, once you do remove the water, the building that is built with this material will not become molded like other materials would do. And that's one of the things that I love about the plant. And also because it is a carbon sequester and has a very deep root system, if you grow it in the right places, it can actually be used as a mitigating factor for flooding, because that's going to stop the water. It may not completely stop the flooding, but it will slow down the amount of water encroaching into a neighborhood if you use that as a line of defense in a flood prone area, where it serves that purpose, and then it could be harvested and used for all the other things that I mentioned. So it's mitigating as a whole plant, but the products also that are used from it are also good for our climate resilient products, if I may use that word, or flood resilient, because of the the anti-mold and its capacity to absorb water and dry out quickly. That makes it a very sustainable and ecologically friendly material to use for building in flood-prone areas.
Yeah, you mentioned too about then you don't have to cut down trees. So one of the things as a botanist, as a specialist, environmental specialist, when we cut down trees, and there's a lot of that going on in South Carolina, it does something to the biodiversity. So a lot of us, used to be able to sit on your porch and see different color butterflies and dragonflies, and you would see fireflies or lightning bugs, and they would cover the tree so much it looked like a Christmas tree was lit up. And you don't see those things. Animals that used to be in the forest are now among people. So why don't you talk about that, how our dependency on using wood products instead of things like hemp is actually changing nature and impacting the animals, and because we're losing species or they're migrating away from us, that's also having an impact on human beings, correct?
Absolutely. Every time we cut a tree, the impact of that one single tree is so huge. We typically look at a tree when we cut it down, that we are increasing soil erosion, because when you cut down the tree, that tree is no longer able to soak up water when it rains. That's just one there are services that living organisms give that we call ecosystem services. So a tree has so many ecosystem services, such as stopping flooding by soaking up the water. Their root systems soak up the water. They keep the soil in place, so they prevent erosion. When you cut down the tree, you've uprooted that tree from where it is. So that means that all the soil around the tree that it kept in place, it's now loose. So when it rains and as the flooding, we know that not only is the frequency of flooding increasing, but intensity of the flooding is increasing. So with every flood that comes and every tree that we cut, we are increasing the rate at which the water is moving and is carrying along all the soil that once was in one place. But the tree that was just cut, that tree provides a home for so many organisms, not just in the tree canopy itself, but under the canopy. When you go into a forest, an established forest, you will see that under the trees, there are other smaller trees and shrubs and mushrooms that are growing under. And that's called the under canopy habitat. You have a lot of animals that live there. When you cut the tree, you've not only lost the habitat for the animals that live directly in the tree, but that tree was providing a home for other, or at least protecting other species underneath it, that now with the tree gone, they cannot survive anymore, because those plants that live under the tree are usually shade tolerant plants. They're plants that grow under the shade. When you cut down the tree, the sun is now blazing down on those under canopy species. Within short period, they're gone too. So you've removed all the habitat you were talking about, the butterflies, the hummingbirds, the fireflies, and then we're not even talking about the ones that live on the forest mat or the forest floor. That's what keeps the biodiversity going. And then all of them are intertwined. So when you remove the tree, you have disrupted an entire ecosystem that can never be replaced. Even when we plant, sometimes they say we replant trees, it takes hundreds of years for a tree to be established. And the amount of carbon that that tree is storing underneath and capturing above is so huge that it's hard to replace it when it's gone. And so if we can find solutions where these trees that have been in place for hundreds of years are left where they are, and we have other means of getting the resources that we have that we need, such as paper and things. And I mentioned industrial hemp for building and things. That would help to reduce the amount of trees that are cut. Now, from an environmental point of view, as a society, we should also move towards reducing our waste. We are a society that is so wasteful on things that we use. The good news sometimes is that we are also moving towards a paperless society. As we move towards a paperless society, that will mean less trees to be cut. But we'll never get to a point where there's zero paper use. Students still have to use a paper in the classroom. So there's something has to be used to create those paper. And industrial hemp is one of those things that can be grown as an agricultural crop. And I always advocate, if you're a hemp grower or farmer, I do not advocate you go and cut down trees to create a farmland for your hemp. Then it defeats the purpose. But if you have an acreage of land that was already used for some other crop, industrial hemp would then be a great thing to grow there for all the reasons that I mentioned. And of course, with the carbon sequestration potential and all these benefits for sustainable products, paper, products, oil, biofuel, that helps to make our ecosystem healthier, and we are less destructive on cutting down the trees, which of course is the biggest problem for driving the climate, the global climate change. Correct. So that's where we are today. Always advocating reducing our waste, and then of course finding alternative means to have the essential products that we need without cutting down trees.
I want to circle back to the interdependency that nature has on different species, etc. And the fact that what I always see that part of our problem is that people see themselves outside of nature instead of a part of nature. And we don't understand, for example, if all of the bees disappeared, we would not have enough bees to pollinate our food, and people would begin to starve. So maybe you can talk about a little bit so folks in our audience understand why, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not trying to kill a bee, a mosquito, a lot of different things, because I know whether we realize it or not, we're dependent on these things, right?
Absolutely. Well, entomologists, those scientists who study insects and things, would say, or wildlife biologists who study animals, they would say that every animal, every insect has a special niche. A niche is defined as the role of any organism in its environment. And so, you mentioned bees. Most people don't know the importance of bees in our lives. Without bees, we will not have food. And we talked about food insecurity. We mentioned food insecurity at the beginning of our conversation. And part of the destruction of biodiversity also goes to the destruction of some of these beneficial insects, such as bees and butterflies. And they are the ones that must have to pollinate our flowers in order for us to get the fruits. And in my botany class, I teach botany, when I tell students that okra is a fruit, botanically speaking, they say, what? I said, yes, okra is a fruit. Tomato is a fruit. Botanically speaking, a fruit is anything that is derived from a flower. And everything that we eat, except for the leafy greens, if it has a flower, it is technically a fruit. And in order for us to harvest that, whether it's an okra, whether it's beans, whether it's corn, it has to be pollinated by something. And so as we destroy our plant, if we destroy our trees and cut down trees and destroy our biodiversity, these bees are also becoming not extinct, but they are going to on the verge of extinction if we don't change the way that we do things. And so the less bees we have, the less fruit in and healthy produce that we have. And that means that a farmer would have to invest a lot in finding alternative ways to pollinate. An alternative, how else can you pollinate when nature does it so perfectly by using bees? And that's the biggest issue. We need to increase our biodiversity by planting those species that encourage and bring back all these beneficial pollinator species like the butterflies, the bees, the hummingbirds. The hummingbirds actually do pollinate certain specific fruits. And so when we have biodiversity, then we have abundance of all these pollinators and beneficial insects. And that means that our food production will be much higher. And that then results in less costs on the food that we buy at the market. Because for a farmer, if the farmer is getting less produce from the same acreage compared to what he used to get maybe 3, 4, or 5 years ago, he'll be forced to increase the prices of his produce. And eventually it trickles down to the person who is going to buy it. And of course, the people who bear the brunt are those people of color, because they are the ones with the least amount of money to buy this fresh produce. So they're forced again to go back to the canned food. Those who are on food stamps, their food stamp can barely buy them anything that is nutritious. They are forced to buy the canned food because that's what they can afford. So it's kind of a chain domino effect. One thing leads to the other and to the other and to the other. But at the end of that chain of this domino thing, there's one group that's always being hit the most: the people of color.
Yes, absolutely. And the good news is that there are things we can do, and you've mentioned so many of them. We can grow food indoors. We can use containers. We can use grow lights if we're indoors. I have a couple of grow lights. They cost $25 each off of Amazon, and actually have grown from seeds all kinds of different plants, and literally grown those plants indoors and been able to eat, the produce. And then even with the what they have, pollinator gardens. Can you talk about that? So there's things we can plant, so we increase the number of bees and butterflies and hummingbirds, right?
Absolutely. And I always tell people when I do my workshop and seminars that everybody in your yard should have a pollinator garden somewhere. And pollinator garden is basically where you have specific flowers that you select that attract all these beneficial insects. If you come to your yard and you see butterflies and you see bees, that actually signifies a healthy environment. It means that your environment is clean, your soil is healthy, and that means that anything that you're growing around your yard, it's going to be really healthy, and your produce will be really maximized, whether you're growing okra, tomatoes, beans, okra, and other types of crops. When you have those pollinator gardens, it brings these insects that are beneficial to you. And so pollinator gardens can be any size. It doesn't have to be big, but also you can have a community pollinator garden. Churches now can have a pollinator garden in their church. They would then support, if they have a garden at their church, that will serve their church family. And so the trick about the important thing about pollinator garden is knowing what plants to select, because the specific plants attract specific insects, especially beneficial ones. And you can do your pollinator garden in containers, or you can just directly plant them into your, incorporate them into your landscaping. And a lot of these pollinator species are really beautiful flowers. So it makes your yard look good, but also they're serving their ecosystem services, as I mentioned. The bees are coming, the butterflies, the hummingbirds, and that actually serves, it's a win-win situation. We
Yes,
have
for
our,
everyone.
right, right,
And if you got a garden, you produce food. So we have
absolutely.
a couple of more minutes left, but
Okay.
before we end, we also talked about, you mentioned that food also can be medicine. So can you quickly talk about like some of the things people can plant in their homes, on their porches, on land, on soil where they're actually growing herbs and different things that they can use as medicine, right? Turn into
Absolutely.
pills and powders and teas, right? So what's
Absolutely.
some of the things that they can grow?
I always tell for beginners, everything we call herb, the reason why we call them herb, because they have some type of aroma, and we use them to flavor food. But the aroma and the flavor that we get from them, those are actually phytochemical. That means, or phytocompounds, compounds that come from plants. They all have medicinal values. For example, basil, we cook with basil for different things, but basil has its own medicinal value. Rosemary, I'm just giving mint. Each of those things that I'm mentioning have medicinal importance, that if you incorporate them into your meal or your tea, or if you want to make capsules. And then you have ginger, you have garlic, you have cinnamon, for example, nutmeg. A lot of these things are things that have medicinal values. There's a whole list of medicinal plants that you can incorporate. Lavender, for example, has very high medicinal potential, especially if you have sleeping issues. Lavender is a very relaxing plant that you can easily grow. The flowers are beautiful, and you can make tea. You can make capsules out of that for your for you to help take care of, relax yourself, take care of stress.
Right.
I mentioned ginger, right? I did mention ginger, yes. Turmeric, and these are some of the ones that are really good for inflammation and other types of pain relieving. But a lot of this, when combined, actually helps to build your immune system, make you stronger, and you're able to fight off a lot of diseases.
Right. Yeah. Turmeric is good for people who have swelling from gout or arthritis and that
Yes,
sort of thing.
yes, yes,
And garlic,
yes,
I love garlic. It's a blood purifier, and
absolutely,
lavender helps you relax and keep your blood pressure where it should be.
absolutely,
And so it's like medicines are all around
absolutely,
us in the food, and
absolutely,
rather than spending a bunch of money at the pharmacy, if we were growing some, and you can grow some of these things in just like you do plants in
absolutely,
pots, right?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And what I tell people also, with plants, it's preventive. You don't wait until you've gotten to a point where you have a huge issue with gout. At that point, now you need medical attention. But if you incorporate these things into your daily lifestyle, your meals, and your day-to-day living, what it does is that it prevents you from getting this health issues. Or if you catch them at a very early stage, it prevents it from progressing to the point where you have to be hospitalized. And so I always tell people that plants are good for preventing you from getting sick. And
Yes.
so it's very important that you incorporate them from the onset, and make sure that you continuously take eat healthy and incorporate all those things, because every plant has its own medicine. Bananas, for example, there's nothing that we put in our body that does not have a medicinal
Mhm.
importance. When you eat bananas, what do we know bananas for? They're high in potassium.
Potassium.
Okay, exactly.
Potassium, yes.
When we eat carrots, carrots are high in carotene and good for our eyes. Tomatoes are high in lycopene. Lycopene is good for our eyes, but it's also good for prostate health. And I do seminars on what you can eat for different. Reverend Woodbury, remember when for the women's
Conference.
yes, I usually come and talk about eating for your health. And so you can literally eat different things to prevent different diseases, but you have to know what to eat. And so we are what we eat.
Yes, we are what and we've run out of time, but I'm glad that you ended on that note. And I want to encourage people to not only, if they like what they've heard and what they've learned, to not only do we want to bring you back in the future, but if they're interested in attending some of these classes that you can share, that they can either reach out to you or they can reach out to me. And so why don't in closing, why don't you tell folks how they can connect with you?
Okay. You can connect with me through email. As I mentioned, Dr. Florence. And Florence, of course, is spelled just like Florence, South Carolina, Florence. Last name is Anorou, and it's spelled Anoruo. And you can reach me at F as in Frank, C as in cat, A as in apple, N as in Nancy, O as in Oscar, R as in red, U as in unicorn, O as in Oscar at gmail.com. Or you can reach me by phone by 803-997-0850. When you reach me, if you're doing by phone, please send a text message, but email, it's greatly preferred. And thank you so much, Reverend Woodbury, for inviting me, and I look forward for the conversations. I'm sorry.
Conversations and coming. Let's do some in-person classes. And
Absolutely.
so you can also, and thank you so much for coming and sharing a little bit of your vast knowledge. And if you want to reach me, Reverend Leo Woodbury, then you can email me at info@newalphacdc.com. You could go to our website, www.newalphacdc.com, or you can call me at the church that I'm privileged to pastor, and that's Kingdom Living Temple on 705 South Irby Street. And the phone number there is 843-799-0740. And so thank you again so much, Dr. Florence Anorou, for being our guest this evening. And to all of you in our listening audience, if there's something that you want to know and there's some places you want to go, then remember, it's the Leo and Larry Show. God bless you, and we'll see you next week, God willing.
Have a good evening.